discussion of findings, this is where we get the feel of the real research. The past sections are just part of the process. The objective of the discussion of findings is to gauge your ability as a researcher to synthesize things or issues, your ability to demonstrate original thinking and creative thinking. In other words, it most effectively demonstrates your ability as a researcher to think critically about an issue, develop creative solutions to problems based on the findings, and formulate a deeper, maybe more profound understanding of the research problem you are studying. I've always wondered why students have great methodologies, spend ample time on data analysis, present their results very well, only to dry up in the preceding chapters where actually the meat of research is. You find someone has 30 pages of results and then produces only 8 or 10 pages of discussion and study implications. This is where the problem is. Many students find it so hard to discuss their findings. You find no discussion at all, but a reproduction of literature review. Dear friends, discussion chapter is different from the chapter on literature review, as we shall see. So at the end of my presentation, it is my prayer that as students, as researchers here, you will be able to summarize your findings, explain your findings, place your findings in context. Let us start. I don't know what's happening to my. Let us start by distinguishing these two concepts. In the last presentation, someone asked, what is the difference between interpretation and discussion? I'm going to distinguish these two concepts in terms of the questions addressed, the objective, and the way they are ordered. Okay, in terms of questions addressed, for interpretation, the focus is on answering the question, what do these results mean? Then for discussion, why did the results turn out the way they did? So you can see that the two are different. They are addressing different issues, okay? While the interpretation addresses what the results mean, discussion addresses why the results turned out the way they did. In terms of objective, for interpretation, it's about making meaning out of the results, toning down the statistical knowledge, statistical language, okay? Then for discussion, it's about making meaning out of the interpretation by providing an in-depth explanation. One side, you're just providing the meaning, and the other side, you're making an explanation or providing an explanation. Then in terms of ordering, of course, interpretation comes before discussion. You interpret first, then you discuss what you have interpreted. No interpretation, no discussion. Then what is the difference between results and discussion? When you go to the dissertations and theses in the libraries, you'll find results being presented as discussion, and you wonder, but there's a difference. For results are unedited, unqualified facts or findings. What you have gathered there, what you've analyzed from the field, just as they are, the raw, that is the results. Then discussion is when you add meat to what has come out from your analysis, when you provided the explanation, okay? So that makes it different. If one builds on the other, okay? Then in terms of what it does, results, presentation of hard data. It can be textual, it can be numerical, it can be diagrammatical. Then for discussion, presentation of explanation. So ladies and gentlemen, what I'm trying to say here is a discussion is a presentation of explanation. That makes it different from results. That makes it different from interpretation. So I hope the person who raised this question is now on board, okay? And for others here as well. Why do we need to present? Why do we need to discuss our findings? We've analyzed, we've interpreted. Why do we need to discuss our findings? We need to do this one because in order to give meaning to the results, to answer the why question, yeah? And also to place the results in context of previous research. Place results in context of theory or conceptual framework. Assess importance of findings, acknowledge limitations of methods, identify new areas for exploration or any other steps. Okay, now I just want everyone on the call has a dissertation. I want us to refer to the dissertations that we've come across, dissertations that we're examining. Now, when you want to do a very good job in the discussion of findings, these are the steps. Number one, starting the task. In starting the task, you prepare an outline of results, you go back to the literature review chapter, you structure your discussion, then you restate your findings, provide explanation of results, place your findings in context. So this is, excuse me, you'll excuse me today, I don't know. I'm feeling good, but we shall handle. So these are the aspects of my presentation today. I'm going to take you through these 4 steps one by one. We begin with starting the task. Now, starting the task, you have your results. Then in your rough work, prepare the outline of your results. Prepare the outline of your results, okay? This is basically the objective of this outline. This is how I do it. The objective of this outline is to help you ease your discussion process. So in the first column, this is just an example. I want you to, I've used a simple illustration here to make the understanding easy. What you can do is just pick the basics, apply to your research, to your study. Here I've used research question, but you could use research hypothesis. I just didn't want to use a hypothesis because I don't want to go into the null hypothesis, alternate hypothesis, this and this and this and that. Just to make life easy, I decided to go with a research question, okay? So let no one be confused, research question, research hypothesis, no. This is just to make life easy, but I want you to just pick the basics. So you can make an outline of your results in this form. have a column on your research question or hypothesis, whatever may be, then have a column of your results, the interpretation, okay? Then have a column on the remarks. It is on the remarks that you are going to base your discussion. When you present an outline like this, you will see that life will be made easy. For instance, the first research question is, what is the relationship between perceived usefulness and e-learning adoption? Those are the results. You can see the p-values are greater. So the interpretation there is the relationship between perceived usefulness and e-learning adoption is insignificant. The association between perceived usefulness and e-learning adoption is inconsequential. So what are your remarks? The evidence does not provide support for expected prediction. So that is your summary, okay? Then you'll be able to discuss why is it that your findings do not provide evidence for the expected prediction. Okay? If you stop at interpretation, you are bound to reproduce, your results and then say that you have discussed. Question 2, what is the relationship between perceived usefulness and attitudes towards e-learning? The results here show that there is a strong positive relationship between the two variables, and the remarks there is the evidence provides support for the expected prediction. The same with the last question. Okay, so now here, this is just an outline to help you. Just like when you're going to answer an essay question, you start by making your points. You provide an outline of what you're going to cover in your essay. This is what I'm trying to do here. Provide an outline of your results. Based on the remarks, you can now move to the next step, which is, going back to the literature review. You need to first, before the structure of your discussion, you need to go back to the literature review. Do not rush to discuss your results yet. Go back to the literature review because now you know what you want to talk about. For instance, you want to talk about why there's no evidence, why your results do not provide evidence that support your first research question, why your findings provide evidence to support your second and third question, okay? This is actually, when you go back to the literature, you get more information to help you make your discussion. And actually going back to your literature review is somehow for you, it's an opportunity for you to update it. This is the time you update your literature review. This step is necessary because certainly you will need this information to support your assertions as you make your discussion in the discussion chapter. Remember one thing, your supporting literature in the discussion section must be consistent with what is in your literature review section. Besides, when you go back to your literature review, you're likely to get new emerging issues in the body of literature that will help you enrich your discussion. When you check students' dissertations and some theses in the library, you will find that the citations in your discussion chapter are totally different from those in the literature review chapter. And we're saying this is not right because the citations you have in the discussion chapter must mirror what you have in your literature review. Okay, so what have I said? You want to discuss your findings. What is the starting point? The starting point is prepare an outline of your results. You now have the remarks, you now have the rough idea. Next is go to the literature review. Go to the literature review and get those. Imagine power here has gone off. I'm praying that we're able to start through. Okay. Now, after the literature review, you now provide a structure. Provide a structure of your discussion. Okay? Provide a structure for your discussion. You can say this structure here is all about how you're going to organize that chapter. Okay? The best thing to do is list the subheadings for the flow of your discussion. How are you going to arrange your discussion? This is very important to maintain a chronological flow of your story or of your thoughts. You know, when you don't make an outline or a structure of how your chapter is going to flow, you are bound to have things mixed up. You are bound to appear very disorganized. So we're saying that have a structure of how your discussion is going to flow. There are three options. Option number one, which is in the first column, is you can choose to discuss your hypothesis or research questions in the order that you originally listed them in your chapter one or literature review. That's the order, okay? Please note that this organizational structure, the way you arrange, okay, is most appropriate when each hypothesis or set of hypotheses is conceptually distinct. If they're different, if they don't link into one another, this one is very appropriate and is very easy. This is what most people do. But you have to be very, very careful because hypothesis by hypothesis discussion can lead to repetitive or an integrated discussion. Just look at these hypotheses. Number one is on attitude and e-learning adoption, then perceived usefulness and e-learning adoption, then perceived usefulness and attitude, then the mediation effect. Then you have perceived ease of use and e-learning adoption, perceived ease of use and attitude, then the mediation effect. You can choose to make your discussion in that arrangement, okay? But then there is the possibility of finding yourself repeating what you had already discussed on a certain particular hypothesis or research question. So if you are to avoid that repetition, you may go for option number two, where you collapse, you collapse your presentation. You integrate them. So you can say you'll start the structure of your discussion. You'll start with first discussing the relationship between attitudes and e-learning adoption. Then you go and tackle the first IV and anything to do with that IV. Then you go to the next IV and anything to do with that IV. That is option number two. Option number three, you can decide to say you will first discuss antecedents of attitudes. Attitude in this study is the mediating variable, okay? Then after that, you discuss the antecedents of e-learning adoption. Then you bring in the first variable, anything to do with it. You bring in the second variable and anything to do with it, okay? This is just a proposal. I'm not saying this is what you go with. The point I'm putting across here is make sure before you sit down to start writing your discussion section, have a flow of how you are going to make your presentation. Have a flow. Three options. Option number one, your flow will be according to how your hypotheses are arranged. Option number two, you can decide to amalgamate the same with option three. The choice is yours. Okay, I want you to look at this. Um, Option number two, looking at the table before you, it's very possible to repeat explanations explanations you see in option number one, it's possible to repeat explanations for number one, number two, and number three when you are discussing or explaining hypothesis number three, number four. So one, two, three. The explanations you provide here, you provide here, you provide here, you find yourself repeating them here. The same with perceived ease of use. The explanation you provide in hypothesis one, you find yourself repeating here, repeating there. Okay? That's why I am saying if your hypothesis or research questions are not distinct, you can go with this arrangement of option one. But where you find that there's an overlapping explanation and tendency for you to to repeat yourself, then integrate them so that you handle the hypothesis as you discuss the main combined. So what I'm trying to say here is provide an outline of how of the flow of your chapter on the discussion. Okay, so you have now an idea of how your discussion chapter is going to look like. Next is start writing. Okay, with the outline of your discussion chapter in place, you are now set to begin writing. Start by restating your findings, okay? Start by restating your findings. Students have the tendency of reproducing their results here. I'm not saying bring your summary table here, no. Those who were with us here last Sunday, you saw the summary of the results. I'm not saying bring that here, no. What I'm saying is do not simply repeat all the data you have already reported in your previous chapter. Aim for a clear statement of the overall result that directly answers your research questions. Okay? For instance, instead of saying the study found that there is a statistically significant positive relationship between perceived usefulness and attitudes towards adoption of e-learning, and then you put all those statistics that you know of. We are saying restate your findings, and this is in chapter 5, discussion of results. Instead of, reproducing what you have in the previous chapter, describe your results clearly using a little statistical jargon as possible. Apply the layman test, okay? Apply the layman test. How would you describe your results to educated people outside the field so that they'll be able to understand them? What I'm saying is tone it down to a layman's language. So You can say, for example, the results on research objective 1 mean that when students' perception on perceived usefulness of using e-learning improves, it can be expected that their attitude towards e-learning will also improve. Restating your findings. How do you start your discussion? You start your discussion by restating your finding. Which one is the best? The best is the one where you tone down the language to a layman's language. Move away from the statistics because you've left the statistics in the previous chapter. Okay? That's what I'm trying to say here. Yeah. The point here anyway is tone down the language to be able to dissect issues. You know, when you tone down the language, you look at the two options. When you tone down the language, it makes discussion easier. We're about making life easy for ourselves. Here are some suggestions, some suggested phrases in restating your results. You can start by saying the results indicate that, the results demonstrate that, the results suggest that, the data suggests that. It all depends on your research question that you're tackling or your hypothesis that you're tackling. It all depends on your philosophical stance, okay? Always remember that. So after restating your findings, after restating, okay, then you proceed to add your voice. You proceed to add your voice. Answer the why question, okay? Here is what you have restated. The next step is provide an explanation, okay? Provide an explanation. Add your voice. Students, after stating their results, actually what they usually do is they state their results like there is a positive relationship between perceived usefulness and attitudes. And after stating that, they get stuck. They get stuck and then rush to say the findings are in line, they are consistent with so and so, they are in line with so and so. You find them lifting the literature review at this point. They restate the results, moreover with the statistics, then they go straight ahead to say the study findings are consistent with so and so. They go straight away to cite literature. The point, ladies and gentlemen, I'm trying to put across here is, before you go to cite literature, add your voice. Add your voice, okay? Add your voice. This is where we gauge your ability to synthesize issues, your ability to demonstrate original thinking and creative thinking, your ability to articulate issues, your ability to triangulate data before you start making comparisons with previous studies. We must first hear you. What are you saying? Actually, this is what people after you will cite in their work, your voice. You've restated your findings, correct. Next, explain. Add your voice. We want to hear your voice. It is that voice that someone after me will be able to cite that in Orobia 2020 said this and this and that. What are they saying? They're going to cite your voice. So from the results, You then provide explanations for the outcomes of your analysis. The meaning of the results might seem obvious to you, okay? But it's important to expound on this for the reader and show exactly how the results answer your research question. For example, you may have mentioned the result on question 1 means when students' perception on perceived usefulness of using e-learning platform improves, it can be expected that their attitudes will also improve. You have to expound on this. I must say at this point that the form of explanation will depend on the type of your research, but some typical approaches, yeah, some typical approaches to explaining the results will include, number 1, identifying whether or not the results were as expected, and then you provide explanations for them. And number 2, going into greater depth when explaining the findings that were unexpected or especially profound. If appropriate, note any unusual, unanticipated patterns or trends that emerged from your results, okay? Let us pause here for a moment. If you were given an essay question reading, explain why you think perceived usefulness affects adoption of e-learning among university students. Or the other way around, explain why you think perceived usefulness does not affect adoption of e-learning among university students. How would you approach that essay question? How would you approach that essay question? You would approach the essay question by first outlining your points. Now, that is what I'm saying here. That the basics in answering an essay question could be applied in our discussion of findings, okay? In our discussion of findings, as we are going to see. Now, when we are discussing, remember the outline of your results I presented first? Some results will turn out as expected, which is common, and there are some results which will turn out as not expected. So how do you discuss the results that came out as expected? It is common that your results will turn out exactly as you expected, as you predicted. You predicted there will be a significant and positive relationship between A and B, and the results even turned out like that. So what do you have to say? How do you discuss this? This means that interpretation will come easily because the why must have been well captured in your literature review. Do you see now why we keep saying, make sure you have a good literature review? Because it is at this point that you go back to your literature review. If your study findings turn out exactly as you expected, progress to discussing alternative explanations for your findings. There are different sources for plausible explanations. For instance, excuse me. For instance, information, you could make use of information from your qualitative interviews. You could look at the demographic factors. You could look at descriptive statistics. You could look at the questionnaire items. You could look at other quantitative results. You could look at existing laws, existing policies, existing guidelines. This is the time for you to think outside the box. The results show a significant positive relationship between A and B. What next? Why? Why? The why. For you to be able to answer the why, interrogate the data that you have. Interrogate the data that you have. In there, when you do an in-depth analysis, in there, you'll be able to get supporting evidence for why things turned out the way they did. For example, the results on perceived useful, the relationship between perceived usefulness and attitude turned out the way you had predicted, okay? Look at the descriptive statistics on the items of perceived usefulness, okay? For example, one of the items may be that using e-learning will improve my performance on my studies. That's one of the items. So look at the mean for that particular item, and then you'll be able to make your discussion in line with that item. When people perceive that using e-learning will improve their performance, definitely this will, translate to a positive attitude. And that accounts for the, positive and significant relationship there. Look at the interview excerpts. What are people saying on the usefulness of e-learning? Look at the frequency distribution, the age demographics. What is the age group distribution in this case? You'll find that majority are between, of your respondents, majority are between the age of 20 and 25. There's a story about this age group that will help you to explain the reason why the result on the relationship between perceived usefulness and attitude turned out the way it did. For example, there is literature that supports that the youth, those young fellows are more techno-savvy than the older ones. So when you say we are going e-learning, for them they'll see it as something easy, and they'll go for it because it will be easy for them to digest this thing and accept it. You're making a discussion. You're making use of your existing, your results. Don't only focus on the regression and correlation results to make your discussion. Make use of other results that you analyze. Why did you have all those, why did you have the sample characteristics? Why did you have the factor analysis? Why did you have all those, the numerous results before correlation and regression? All those results, this is the point at which you make use of them to enrich your discussion. Let's move on to tax administration and tax compliance. The result turned out as expected. You can dig deeper into the tax laws, the policies, what is on ground as far as the tax administration is concerned. What is on ground? What is URA saying? Look at the descriptive statistics on tax administration items. Look at what the interviewees said. Look at the demographics. There is a story in there to support your findings, okay? Look at the next one, ethical behavior and fraud management. To support these, in order to like come up with a story, to come up with a solid story. Look at the respondent's background. Look at existing laws, the regulations, company policies, etc. Interrogate your data. Look at, get outside the box. Get outside the box of say there's a positive and significant relationship. Hey, go beyond this and provide meat. Provide meat and come up with that delicious meal, okay? That delicious meal. Look for evidence to support your findings. Ladies and gentlemen, this is what I am emphasizing. In discussion, we said, number one, prepare your outline of results, restate your findings, provide an explanation. I've gone ahead to show you the sources where you can get the meat for your meal, okay? No, so that is for the case where the results turned out as we expected. We go on. When results are not as we expected, what do? Sometimes the results may not turn out as expected. Should I worry because my results have turned out the opposite? Should I worry? The answer is a capital no in red letters underlined. But you find students stressing over this. People can really stress. Others even go back and try to manipulate so that they come back to a positive and significant results or relationship. My dear students, do not force your results. Do not force your results. If they say insignificant, it is insignificant. You find people stressing. They really stress and go back and try to manipulate data so that they can come up with positive and significant results. Who tells you that everything has to be significant positive? No. Some people even say, do not waste time discussing results that did not turn out as expected. I don't know why. I don't know about that. I don't know. But what I can say is this. When your results turn out not as expected, you should be grateful. You know why? Because this gives you lots to talk about. I mean, you have a huge story to tell. Yes, you may have supported hypothesis, but what is that unique thing? Probably your contribution to knowledge can even come out from the results that did not turn out as expected. No, seriously think about this. Wouldn't you want to know, for instance, why perceived usefulness is not significantly associated with adoption of e-learning? I mean, it sounds obvious. Your results should support that perceived usefulness is associated with adoption of e-learning. But then you find that on ground, this is not the case. Wouldn't you want to know why? Wouldn't you want to know why? So why would you discard the results and say, this one is insignificant, you leave it and you go to the next? Or wouldn't you want to know why organizational culture is not a significant predictor of fraud management? To me, this is something new, something, exciting that I would want to know more about. Wouldn't you want to dig deeper and understand why your hypothesis was not supported, why your research questions or your results turn out as not expected? I, for one, now be curious, honestly. Friends, what I'm trying to say is this. Failed predictions can be as important as supported predictions in a well-designed study. with adequate sample size and reliable and valid measures. Failed predictions may suggest that your original conceptual framework needs revision. For example, I will start with a particular conceptual framework, but end up with a revised one, which I now call Orobia 2021 model, after dropping the parts that that were not supported by the findings. From your analysis, you'll find that what you had, the predicted model actually is revised at the end of the day according to your results. According to your results. So, your results turn out as not expected. How do you discuss that? Here's the approach. Number one, you could look for results. You could look for reasons why this may have occurred. Look for a range of plausible explanations. Or number two, you could go ahead and conduct supplemental analysis. Remember, this is a PhD. You go beyond correlation and regression. Okay? So, in discussing results that did not turn out as expected, we are saying give reasons why. And the reasons will come from your qualitative interviews. This is for the case of critical realism. But if you didn't have interviews, maybe this is the time you have to now go out and conduct interviews to try and come up with answers. Okay? What are the interviewees saying? They could say something that will, support your findings. Look at the measurement concerns. Did you measure well? Are there alternative measures? Were your measures reliable enough to detect true effects? To be able to answer this, you go to your factor analysis results. To be able to answer this, you go to how you measured your variables. I'll give you an example. Organizational culture has more than 5, should I say, theories? There's a theory by Hofstede, there's a theory by Denson, there's a theory by this, by that. And all these different people have different measures, or what I would say constructs for organizational culture. So you'll find that maybe you use the one of Denson, and then the results turn out insignificant. There's an insignificant relationship. When you're looking out for the measurement constants, it could be that the measures by Denson were not actually the ones that you should have used. That could be an implication. But it all depends on your conceptualization. What I'm trying to say is, one of the reasons why the results don't turn out as expected could lie in the way you measured your variables. So go back and look at how you measured your variables. After doing that, go back and look at the studies that measured the way they measured, what were their findings, what was the context, what were the sample, what were the demographics, and all that, for you to build a story. I hope I'm very clear on that. Then other sources where you can get your explanations or your reasons for why the results didn't turn out the way they did. You look at the demographics. It could be the farm size issue. It could be the farm age issue. It could be the gender, age, and so forth. Okay. Then also it could be as a result of inadequate sample size. Maybe your sample size was too small. Ladies and gentlemen, sample size effects are very key in data analysis. Some hypotheses are rejected on the basis of the inadequate sample size. So also look into that. Then procedural aspects. Procedural aspects. For example, if your results turned out were not as expected or as predicted, you could go back to the past studies and look at the procedure they used. The procedure they used in their study. You'll find that in the previous studies where you get your concepts, you'll find that maybe they use a panel data approach, and here you're using a survey that could have an effect. Maybe you use the self-administered questionnaire. They use the self-administered questionnaire. Here you're using a face-to-face. I mean, just dig into the procedural aspects. That could also provide reasons why the results were not expected. What I'm saying here is the results may not turn out as predicted for various reasons. And these reasons are based in your results. Dig deeper into your results. Compare with past studies. I've given you a number of sources, but I'm not saying use all of them, use all this information at once. No, consider each of these in turn. Not all of them may apply. Perhaps you may find that you can make use of the interview and information on demographics, or you can make use of the procedure, whatever. That is a pick what is applicable. Don't say in her presentation, she said these are the sources, so I use all the sources. No, it depends on your study. Consider each of these in turn, discussing reasons why it is or it is not a plausible explanation for your failure to find what you expected. If you kept a log, what I call a log or a code book, while you were collecting and analyzing your data, pull it out. This is the time. Pull it out and see if your observations give you some ideas for why the results did not turn out as expected. As you consider explanations, think about how you might be able to use some of your results to provide evidence for or against. Okay, fine. We proceed. We said when your results were not as predicted, number one, look for explanations. Yeah, go into your interview guides, interviews, and so forth. The second option will be conduct supplemental analysis. You could go beyond the analysis you have performed. If you did not run a mediation test, maybe this is now the point at which you run a mediation test so that you can provide an answer. For example, we found that the relationship between perceived usefulness and adoption of e-learning was not significant. What does that mean? Could it mean that for perceived usefulness to associate with um, e-learning adoption, is there a mechanism through which it can, work? You need to rethink how your IV works. You need to rethink how your IV works. Does it have to go through a media, or is it just simply that there's that direct link just doesn't exist? Yeah. So test for mediation. You'll find that there is a significant mediation effect. So now that becomes your answer. That becomes your explanation. The results on the relationship between perceived usefulness and adoption of e-learning is supported by the mediation results to say that actually for perceived usefulness to have an effect or relate with e-learning adoption, it must pass through, the effect must be felt through the mediator, which is attitude. You go beyond, perform some other analysis. You could choose to regress the elements of your IV. Remember, let's say organization culture, you're looking at the relationship between organization culture and fraud management. Organization culture had its dimensions, okay? You found that this relationship is not significant, is insignificant. So what you can do is try to regress the elements, the dimensions of organization culture on fraud management and see. You'll be able to point out the particular ones with significant relationships, the particular ones with the ones that I want to say are causing noise. You'll be able to point out that and provide a bigger story. Okay, you could also regress the IV on the elements of the DV. Still looking at organization culture and fraud management. Fraud management may have had, the separate dimensions. Try to see what the results are saying. You may find your answers there. Why did the relationship between organization culture and fraud management not turn out as expected? It may be, the answer may be in those results that are coming up, okay? Then look at, you may decide to regress the demographics of the firm. That is if you didn't run a hierarchical regression, because the requirement to run a hierarchical regression is that you must have control variables. So if you didn't regress the control variables, you may go ahead and see. It could be it could provide explanations for why the results didn't turn out the way they did. Treat a variable as a moderator. Look out for differences between the variables or differences between the demographics. What I'm trying to say here, members, is that interrogate your data. Discussion when results were not as expected. Number one, provide explanations for them. The explanations may come from, you pick out from the interview guides, you consider the sample size and so forth. In addition to that, you could run other analysis. From the results of those other analyses that you perform, you may have your answer. You may have your answer. I'm not saying change what was insignificant to significant. No, I am saying provide the story behind that insignificant answer or that insignificant relationship. Provide an answer. Okay? Don't struggle to turn what was significant to, what was insignificant to significant. No. Get me clearly. Just provide why it turned out the way it did. When you run a number of other additional analyses, you will find the answer. This is the point that distinguishes a thesis from a dissertation. With a dissertation, yes, you can remain on testing the correlation and regression, doing the correlation and regression analysis. You can stop there, yes, fine. But here we are looking at a PhD. With a PhD, you go beyond. You go beyond, interrogate your data further and further and further. Do not render your other statistical analysis, your other analysis redundant. Make use of all the results that you analyzed. You have the presentation of your findings, right? Presentation of your results in chapter 4. Make use of all that information in the process of building up a story. Okay. Now, since you have gone ahead to do additional analysis, make sure these additional analysis are presented in your previous chapter. Make sure you go back to the previous chapter and insert that additional analysis there. Otherwise, we will ask you, you are saying this and that. Where are the results? Make sure you present them in your previous chapter as well. Okay, let's proceed. We have said in discussing your findings, start with the outline of your results, restate your results, provide explanations, and then next, place your findings in context. Place your findings in context. Place your findings in perspective of other studies of the topic found in your literature review. Okay? How are your findings similar or different from other studies? Based on the literature, are the findings based on the literature, are the findings what might have been expected? You know, you're comparing your results with literature. Are the findings what might have been expected? Is your literature, is your finding supported? If your results differ from those of other studies, what explanations can account for this? This is the time. Place your findings in context. Place your findings in context. Your study is not the only research dealing with the issue you are investigating. Remember that. Refer to your chapter on literature review. You will find that you have several pages describing related studies. Do not therefore write your discussion as though your study was the only one in that field. No. As you summarize and describe your results, consider how they do or do not fit in your literature review, in what others did. To do this, think about how your study compares with earlier research in terms of population characteristics, measurement tools, independent variables, research designs, procedures, their findings, etc. Then think about whether your results do these three things. Number one, converge, clarify, contradict past studies. Okay. Yeah. So now we are looking at the case. You've compared your results with what past studies have found out. If your study converges with others, look out for aspects in your study that extends previous findings, okay? For example, literature may indicate that researchers repeatedly found that working capital management measured in financial ratios correlates with financial performance of a firm. Now, that is what others have found. They used financial ratios to measure working capital. Now, for you also, you find that your results, you find that working capital management correlates with financial performance of the firm. But this time using activities involved in managing working capital. Remember, the past studies found significant relationship. You've also found significant relationship. But when you dig deeper, you find that in the past studies, they used financial ratios, and in your study, you used activities. Yeah, the actions involved in managing working capital. So this is where you now contribute to literature. This is now where you extend knowledge. So while your study are consistent with past studies, it extends the knowledge in terms of the measures of working capital. Some may extend in terms of the sample. For instance, past studies may have looked at working capital management and financial performance in terms of banks. And now for you, you are looking at manufacturing. So it extends to the manufacturing sector. Purpose to dig deeper. Purpose to dig deeper, okay? Purpose to dig deeper. Stop at saying your results or your findings are consistent with so and so. Your results support so and so. No, go beyond. Add your voice. Add your voice. What is your add to the body of knowledge? Okay. Your results, here we are saying if your findings converge with others, look out for aspects in which your study extends earlier findings. And then here, your results could be to clarify past findings. Okay, to clarify past findings. It is possible that some previous findings may remain uncertain, inconclusive, or ambiguous. So your findings might clarify the uncertainties identified, okay? For example, suppose past studies on access to credit amongst youth looked at youths in general, yeah? Looked at youth in general without testing for gender differences. And then in your study, you actually decided to examine gender differences and find that these gender differences exist and they are insignificant. What this means is that, number one, past studies may have failed to find effects when genders were combined, yeah, because of the variance attributable to gender. Note that samples made up mainly of men will show patterns for male gender, while those made up mainly of women will show patterns of the female gender, okay? So the clarification then is that future studies should consider gender as an important variable. This is an example that, you know, it could be, this is an example of the case where you're clarifying with past findings. You know, your results show that organizational culture, the relationship between organization culture and fraud management is insignificant. Dig deeper. The relationship between perceived usefulness and uh, adoption of e-learning is insignificant. Dig deeper. The relationship between access to credit and business performance among youth is insignificant. Dig deeper. Dig deeper. Okay? You will find that your results actually clarify what you didn't know or what was not known. Then there are also possibilities that your results contradict past findings. If you don't find what others found, consider why. Why is it that for other studies you may have read, like, let's say 50 articles? Why is it that in all the 50 articles they are reporting a positive and significant relationship between perceived usefulness and adoption of e-learning? Why? Why is it that for you, your finding shows an insignificant relationship? Why? Why? What are the differences between your studies and others? Consider methodological explanations. Could different measures, procedures, or samples account for the discrepancy? These are the questions that should run in your mind, and you should look for answers. Look for answers. Discuss what your failure to replicate other results says about the limitation to the generalizability of your findings. Okay? Do your findings suggest new distinctions that may need to be made in literature in future? You know, this is the time that you sit down and really think deep, think outside the box, think outside the box. Consider as well what your research contributes to existing literature. Remember, as a PhD student, you're supposed to contribute new knowledge. You might provide less novel information. The issue is you have certainly added something new. What is not yet known, okay? You've added to something that is known. Point this out. What did you do that no one else did? How did this improve on past investigations? Ladies and gentlemen, what I'm saying here is, in placing your findings in context. There are cases, when you are comparing past studies with yours, there are cases where your findings converge with past findings. Your findings clarify past findings, and your findings contradict past findings. This is where you talk about, you add the meat. This is where we expect to hear your voice. We expect to hear your voice. You remember what I said earlier? I said, approach your discussion chapter the way you approach an essay. You have your points. You have your points outlined very well. Now, discuss your points. Add the meat to come up with a delicious meal. We want a chronologically flowing story, a coherent story supported by empirical literature, supported by theories, and so on. Place your study in context. Place your study in context. So, dear friends, from the foregone summation, I can comfortably say your discussion chapter should have the principal findings, explanation of the findings, placing your findings in context. You don't have to write these as subheadings, no. All you need to do is have this flow embedded in your write-up. As I'm reading through your discussion on, let's say, hypothesis 1, I must be able to pick out the principal findings, the explanation, and how you place your findings in context. I must be able to cite these three things. You don't have to write them as subheadings, no. But as I read, I must be able to cite these three things. You can organize your discussion around your key themes, your hypotheses or research questions, research objectives, etc., following the same structure of your results section or what you had in the chapter 1 or literature review, whatever the case may be. But you can also begin by highlighting the most significant and then go to the unexpected. The choice is yours. The thing is, make sure there's a chronological flow of thoughts. Carry the reader along. Carry the reader along. When I get a book like this and I'm on chapter 5, I want to read and not put down the book. That is what you should have at the back of your mind. And also as you write, have at the back of your mind the reader. Assume the reader, tone down the language into something that is easily palatable, okay? So, yeah, here I'm saying that some suggested examples in how you go about your discussion of findings. You can start by saying, in line with the hypothesis 1 or research question 1, research objective 1, contrary to the hypothesized association, ABCD, you add the results contradict with the claims of the result. You should have an academic language as you write your discussion chapter. Have an academic language as you write your discussion. General rules. General rules. Do not be verbose or repetitive. Try as much as possible to avoid repetition. What you've already said, don't say it again. That's why I said earlier, make an outline of how you are going to arrange your discussion chapter. Do that in such a way that you avoid repetition. The points you used to explain, let's say, hypothesis 1, you bring it on hypothesis 4. Be creative. Be concise and make your points clearly. Avoid using technical jargon. Follow a logical stream of thoughts. Use subheadings to help you organize your presentation. Importantly, do not use causal language when discussing a relational findings. This is very dangerous. Actually, I see this a lot. If your study was not a true experiment, replace verbs that imply causation with words and phrases such as correlated with, associated with. You find people saying has an impact, has an influence, has an effect, when actually that is not what you set out to do. You never set out to look for affect, effect, influence, impact. These big words relate to different research designs. So always, have at the back of your mind your research design. These words here, impact, effect, association, relation, relate to different research designs. Do not use causal language when discussing relational findings. Next, if you wish to discuss a supplemental analysis or the additional analysis, first describe the test and its outcomes in the results section. This is, I mentioned already. Do not simply reproduce results section. Do not simply reproduce literature review and say that you've discussed. When we go to people's discussion books, chapters, you'll find that it's just a reproduction of literature review. We want your voice. Oh, thank you for listening. I had to rush because power's gone off where I am. And I didn't want my battery to go off without delivering what I had prepared to deliver. Ladies and gentlemen, I end here, and over to you, Michael, to handle the next session.
Okay, thank you so much, Professor Laura. And I want to appreciate you so much for having extended the discussion, which we began last week. And I want to ask all the participants to join me in appreciating Professor for the great presentation. And I believe this presentation has triggered so many things in our minds. One which I'm sure the presentation has been able to trigger in our minds some questions which need clarification. I also believe that the presentation has been able to trigger additional comments and contribution because they say iron sharpens iron. So Professor, we must thank you, Laura, for such a wonderful presentation. And I believe that your contribution to scholarship is really great, and we appreciate your contribution in this platform. But maybe before we go forward to make additions, to make comments, to make observations, to raise questions, I would want to begin. I would want to begin by acknowledging all the senior colleagues in the platform. And like I said in the beginning, senior colleagues, there is a great appreciation to the contributions we make in the platform. Last week, one of the participants actually inboxed me and told me that the contributions, apart from the presentation, but the additions we make bring more clarity in some of the issues which they seek to understand. And they really appreciate your contributions. And I would still continue appealing to the senior colleagues to keep on supporting. And of course, I know Professor Laura, you will be able to give more insights where needed. But before we go into that session, I want to, in a special way, acknowledge the senior colleagues in the platform. I want to acknowledge, of course, our Professor Joseph Ntai for this wonderful platform and all the support you give to us. I also want to appreciate Professor Laura Orobia. Thank you. Dr. Evelyn Achkech, thank you. Dr. Ahmed Walugembe, thank you. Dr. Ambrose, thank you. Dr. Goretti, thank you. Dr. Hassan Bashir, thank you. Dr. Ibrahim, thank you. Dr. Isaac Kayongo, thank you. Dr. Jolie, thank you. Dr. Joseph Mulumba, thank you. Dr. Gideon Kuzinza, thank you. Dr. Samuel Mayanja, thank you. Dr. Sebastian Bigabenka, thank you. Dr. Wilfred Caucus, Aupal, thank you. I don't know whether I've omitted any other senior colleague, but all the senior Professor Janet, thank you. All the senior colleagues, we really appreciate you. And I see the number of the senior colleagues is growing day by day, even the participants. And really, we appreciate all the support to the platform. Now, I think I also want to, before I invite comments, I also want to appreciate all the participants from different countries. We have somebody from Botswana, we have people from Zimbabwe, we have people from South Africa, people from Kenya. You're welcome, we appreciate you. People from Rwanda, people from Tanzania, and everybody from Uganda. We also have people from Nigeria. We appreciate your participation. Last week we had somebody from Nepal, and I want to acknowledge that the platform is really drawing scholars from everywhere. And I think the strength of scholarship depends on the people you flock with. And I believe that that's why really this platform is helping us. So I want to right away invite comments from all the participants. Maybe I'll begin with the students. If there's any question, if there's any point of clarification, I invite you. Yes. There is also a book which has been on the chat room, so you can actually be able to upload the book. Any comment, any point of where somebody wants a clarification? I think the presentation was so clear, but maybe it could have triggered some thoughts. Yes, Carol, you go ahead and unmute your mic and speak. Carol, you raised your hand, please. Yes, I think Carol, you raised your hand. You can go ahead and unmute your mic and then, yes, Sylvia.